wanted to make sure we could, that everybody could see it just fine. And so tonight's topic is about networking as a tool for logistics management. And it's one of the topics that I've been working on in recent years because it's a topic that is really close to what I work on in terms of research and teaching. And I work with industry partners. Our program has 40 industry partners associated with the program at UNO, and they provide us a lot of insights about what kinds of networking they're doing and logistics programs that they're developing. So with that, I will get started. So networking is a tool for logistics management. In the past, this was a lot easier to talk about. When I started my career in this area, we had a lot of different topics to talk about, but we really focused on three areas. We focused on three groups: shippers, carriers, and customers. Everybody knew whose role was whose. We knew who the competitors were, we knew who the customers were, and we knew who the carriers were. So it was pretty straightforward. And as we go through the process of the discussion in the past, it was easy to talk about these things. And as we extended our discussion through marketing channels, both upstream and downstream, and how supply chains were developing, things began to change over time over the course of my career. As professionals, we deal with several different global dynamics every day. And we deal with things like global competition, which is evolving constantly around the world with emerging markets and developed economies and so on. We have empowered customers now who know more about our products, our services, our companies, and our people than they've ever known before, simply because they can. They have access to so much more information now that they can make a lot more informed decisions, and we have to be on top of our game to meet their needs and create value for them. Next, we have advances in technology, which have been going on for a long time over the course of my entire career. And advances in technology is a hot topic in many areas when we talk about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I work with my colleagues in the College of Information Science every week on these kinds of initiatives, and it's really exciting. And then finally, the last dynamic that everyone is dealing with this past year, beginning in 2020, has been the COVID-19 pandemic. These dynamics have really created for a lot of change and opportunity in logistics from a global perspective. And it's really important that we take advantage of what's coming down the road in the future for us. As we go through this process, we talk about how we redefine the logistics management today. As I mentioned, artificial intelligence and information technology is part of that equation. We also spend a lot of time talking about robotics, automation, advanced manufacturing, and so on. But the piece that's always missing in many of these discussions, for me anyhow, has to do with workforce development. Regardless of what we change in terms of technology or our processes, our workforce has to keep pace with it. And every one of the companies that I work with will tell you they're still redesigning, redeveloping, or reengineering their workforce for the future. They're all asking me the three main questions. How are we supposed to improve our recruiting, our reskilling, and retention of our best employees? So those are the things that have been a challenge going in the pandemic and coming out as well. The topic for tonight that I wanted to focus on was on the network effect of logistics management. The network effect occurs when we add one more element to whatever it is that we've been doing. If we look up and down our supply chain and we look at our tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers or distributors to get to our customers, what happens if we add one more person, one more carrier, one more broker, one more company to what we're doing? We're becoming very specialized in many different areas of how we create transparency, how we deal with information technology, how we track shipments, how we document shipments across borders, and those kinds of things. In the end, we are moving towards a network of networks. It's no longer going to be adequate to talk about upstream and downstream suppliers and distributors going forward. We're going to have to talk about their networks of suppliers and distributors. We're going to have to talk, that's for our suppliers, our distributors as well. At the end of the day, to be successful going forward, we're going to have to work on the integration of talent and technology. Technology is rapidly advancing. Our talent has to keep pace. So when we talk about the business case for network transportation systems. This discussion is focused on efficiency and effectiveness, and that has not changed over time. What we do has changed, but the topics have not. You know, efficiencies in procurement, load consolidation, mode conversion, efficient routes, there's nothing new here, but how we do it is changing, and that's what's different for us. Effectiveness, you know, improving customer service and additional market insights have not really changed except how we do them. Why? Because our customers' expectations have changed and we know more about our markets as well. The last two on this list have been dramatically changed this year. That has to do with risk mitigation and disaster recovery networks. The pandemic, we've had several natural disasters around the world this year, have created disruptions in our supply chains. We've had a focus on different types of recovery systems in place with some mixed results. And so we really need to take into account the risk mitigation process and disaster recovery networks, not only to get through the pandemic, but also how do we move forward? If we're going to try to build our network effectively and efficiently, we need to find one more entity. Who else can we add to our value chain that's going to bring something to our process that will bring a benefit to everyone? This has to be something that can be scalable across all the entities that are involved. In summary, one of the things that we're talking about is the transition from the enterprise focus to an ecosystem focus. And this really comes down to network collaboration and networking and logistics management programs. And this means that we're going to move beyond business-to-business network and efforts and so on to this hub of hubs that we've been talking about. We need to move outside of the four walls of our organization in order to increase our efficiencies. Crowdsourcing and sharing of costs and rewards for new product innovation and development are becoming more important every year because the products are becoming more and more sophisticated. Resource and risk sharing are absolutely essential in order to take on bigger tasks. And I think that's really the focus of what we need to bring into this conversation today. This is really important if you're trying to do more than what one firm can handle. If you're trying to tackle the big problems or the specialty projects or services and so on, it's really important we get involved here. Intellectual property development and management is also a critical part of this process. And again, sometimes that extra person, that extra entity is somebody that knows how to manage this process, say on a global scale, and how to manage that across different markets or different countries along the way. It's about creating this ecosystem. And ecosystem mapping, I believe, will be the next frontier of strategic networks in logistics management. And when we talk about ecosystem mapping now, this is taking our traditional value stream maps and extending them to multiple levels, both up and down the supply chain and horizontally as well. Who else can we bring into the discussion? What else should we be looking at? What other kinds of things can we be considering to improve what we're doing? The challenge quickly becomes, how do we find all of these entities? How do we keep track of them all? And we have so much information available. How do we make good managerial decisions out of that process? And ecosystem mapping will help us get there. Some of the challenges we face going into these multi-enterprise networks for logistics have to do, first of all, with change. Change is expensive and difficult for logistics firms. Well-established technology can be embedded throughout an organization. It can be in place for years. Technology platforms that took years to build and cost millions of dollars are hard to replace. It's hard to justify that sometimes. And then retraining the workforce can be expensive. But the end result is if we don't change, if we don't keep up with what's happening in the global markets, we will not be competitive in the long run. The cost of not changing may be higher than all the changes that are going to cost us money out of pocket. So we really have to take a look at this from a careful point of view, make sure we make smart investments. This puts even more emphasis on leadership and strategy for organizations today, because we can't make mistakes anymore. We have to be able to make good decisions and move forward in a positive manner. Some of the other things that we have to deal with along the way have to do with legacy systems and opportunities. You know, we've moved from traditional point-to-point communication systems and transportation systems, but they're focused on the enterprise. We move towards hub and spoke models that help, and they've helped advance logistics management systems and programs a great deal. However, we need to move to a more hub-to-hub kind of model. It gets us closer to that ecosystem where entities not only get a chance to interact with each other, but they participate. And it's this active participation that is going to help drive our networks forward in a positive manner. And that's going to help us compete from a network perspective as much as an individual or organization perspective. Some of the things that we have to deal with along the way. We have to deal with things like technology acceptance. This has to do with organizations and the workforce itself. You know, the technology acceptance model has been around for a while, but it really is important when we're talking about moving towards ecosystems of logistics, programs, and streams. You know, what's the perceived usefulness or the ease of use of what we're trying to do? You know, sometimes we bring in an entity just to make things easier to use. What's the behavioral intention? Why are we doing this? Who are we going to bring in and why? And then finally, are we actually going to use it? One of the challenges that I face with my industry stakeholders, and we communicate that about this on a regular basis, is that they adopt technology and it has to be in place pretty quickly now because things are changing so rapidly. One of the things that has occurred over the last decade, and certainly in recent years, now even more so in the pandemic, is how quickly product life cycles change. We introduce new models and new updates of products on a regular basis. I come from the technology industry where most of my experience is at, and new upgrades happen every year. We launch a new product every 9 months, and so this becomes a really important part of the process. How do we get our organization to accept the technology in this manner? Resistance can come from all levels. We can have it at the leadership level, we can have it at the investor level, we can have resistance from customers, suppliers, maybe resistance to what we're doing it. It just depends on what they want to do or don't want to do. It's how they react, you know. I may not like it. We may not have any choices. I'll do it if I have to. There's a distrust factor. Why are we changing this? One of the biggest challenge here is that making changes somehow means we're not trusting the old way of doing things. That's not the case at all. What we're trying to do is move toward new things. So we have to have really strong leaders to communicate effectively here. We have others that provide great scrutiny on what we're doing, you know, evaluating, exposing, and countering any weaknesses that show up in the new systems. You have to have somebody in charge of this that's a strong leader and a strong sponsor so that you can keep the inertia going forward. Otherwise, you get stuck at the status quo and nobody wants to make the change. And in this environment, firms that don't change and logistics programs that don't change and networks that don't change could become obsolete rather quickly. One of the more interesting topics that has occurred with my industry partners over the last year now, since the pandemic started early last year for us, is COVID-19 as a source of innovation. Now, innovation has come in a number of different ways in our particular market here in the United States. In the early going, we had disruptions in the food supply chain. We had those kinds of things take place. COVID-19 disrupted our school system, and the cafeterias and so on shut down, and our food processing was out of step with the market. Everything that was packaged for restaurants and schools and hospitals and any other industrial site couldn't be sold on the retail shelf there because they had the wrong packaging. So it created a lot of opportunity in terms of innovation. We've had to come up with some pretty creative ways on having to deal with that. It's been a great lesson on flexibility, communication, and preparedness. So we really need to understand how to be flexible, manage our risks, and so on. What has occurred in the last 6 months, as we have learned to deal with the front end of the pandemic here, is the opportunities for the long run. And it's time to start lifting our head up from our desk and looking forward over the horizon and understand where we're headed into the future and what are the opportunities for your customers, for your business, for logistics firms in general and specific networks in particular. What are the opportunities that are likely to take place as the pandemic gets under control? Obviously, we've seen this increase of e-commerce, and that's had a dramatic impact on our distribution channels here. And it has caused disruptions, and we've seen bottlenecks and still dealing with bottlenecks with our seaports along the way. We have issues of deadhead truck miles. We have too many truck trailers going back and forth from one destination. They unload and have to drive too many miles empty. So I'm working with several of my partners on how we optimize that and reduce that. On a global scale, we're dealing with empty shipping containers. How do we get them in the right place more efficiently? And how is there an opportunity there? What do we do with them that can do more than just shipping empty containers? Reverse logistics is becoming very popular in different regions around the world. As more and more countries come out of the pandemic, we're back to a focus on sustainability and social responsibility. So reverse logistics for bringing back merchandise that was damaged in shipment or it didn't work right, bringing return products or used up products for recycling or remanufacturing or things like that. And so reverse logistics is a booming area right now in different parts of the economy. And then finally, we have micro-fulfillment. Again, this is an offshoot of e-commerce. As we talk about micro-fulfillment across the board, from large retailers to our local supermarket, this has created all kinds of new opportunities, but not to say there aren't challenges along the way. We're still dealing with how we optimize some of these activities. But the organizations that figure this out for the long haul and structure their new logistics networks appropriately are going to be able to really leverage some great opportunities. One of the things I would like to talk about at this point has to do with re-engineering the hybrid workforce. And by the hybrid workforce, this is that integration of talent and technology that I like to talk about from time to time with my industry partners. Who are we looking for in the future to help our workforce stay up to speed? You know, as working at a university, you know, we're dealing with trying to turn out the workforce of the future. And it is an exciting and a humbling experience all at the same time. Because when we think about the technology, what kinds of people are we looking for? Well, we're looking for technical innovators, obviously. So computer skills, coders, and so on is absolutely there. Commercial scanners, who understands the market as quickly as anybody else or even quicker than anybody else? Social media influencers have become a big part of many of the markets that my industry partners work with right now. And we have to have people that understand how to gather information from these networks and provide better insights of where the market's not at today, but where it's going to be in the future, where it's likely to be. This leads to a lot of discussion about innovation and new product development. So we need innovation champions and gatekeepers. One of the most interesting challenges that I'm dealing with right now with one of my industry partners is too many ideas. So they decided that they were going to start innovating for life after the pandemic and send out a call for ideas from their customers, their employees, their suppliers, and so on. The challenge that they've created now is they're getting over 100 new product ideas every month. And they can't develop that many new products in a year. They might develop 10 in a year, but not 100 per month. The question is now, how do you pick the winners out of this? And how do you decide where we're going in the future? So they have to go back to the commercial scanners and the technical innovators to figure out what we can and can't do. Then they have to figure out who's going to lead the project. So project leaders, project management, and sponsors in terms of executives are absolutely going to be critical as we move these networks forward, because the changes are going to be constant and ongoing. This idea of re-engineering a hybrid workforce is going to be a long-term process. This is not an event. And why is that? Well, how the skills of workforce for your workforce changed over the last 5 years? And besides the pandemic itself, what kinds of skill sets have changed over the last 5 years? What's changed? A lot of technology has changed, the products changed, customer expectations have changed, even in our own lives. If you think about yourself for just a moment, how many of you have a cell phone that's more than 5 years old? So that's a big challenge, especially in the workplace. And so what skills are going to be needed or recruited or re-engineered over the next 5 years for an organization? This is the question that we're asking. As an educator, this is really exciting for me because I come from a tech world, but it's also a little bit daunting because whatever I teach my freshmen coming in, 4 or 5 years later, whatever we taught them is probably going to be obsolete. Some of it will be obsolete before they graduate. So that's a challenge for all of us as we talk about reinventing our workforce and re-engineering our workforce for the future. This is really a dynamic event it's going to be ongoing. This is no longer an event. This just needs to be integrated as part of our organizations going forward. In the end, what we're trying to do is come up with actionable intelligence. What is it that we can do that fits where we're going with our organization? It comes back to the importance of strategy, the mission, vision, and values of your organization. What is it that you're going to do? What do you want to be? Where are you going to go? And how are you going to get there? How do we find one more entity to help us out? The question is, help us out with what? So we have this list of things that we all have in consideration, the interconnectivity of these organizations. How is automation going to affect us? Machine learning. We have real-time data and collaboration, and market dynamics. The challenge that we've had with real-time data and machine learning has been interesting to watch over the last couple of years. What's been the biggest challenge for my industry partners? Having too much information, having too many data points. We can't react to everything. We did a review of some of the scorecards and some of the dashboards that the executives that I deal with were dealing with on a weekly basis. And so I had an executive show us his weekly dashboard, and his dashboard had 83 graphs and charts on it. Now, nobody can react on 83 items every single week, okay? The question is, which ones were important or not? Which ones made a difference for the company or not? Which ones fit with the strategy of the organization or not? We're able to take 83 and work that down to 8. So that now brings the dashboard down to a workable level. Why did you end up with a dashboard with so many items on it? Well, because we can. We have this technology now to gather all this data, and now it's a matter of what's actionable. What's the true intelligence that we need to make good decisions for our organization going forward? What this really comes down to is a transition from artificial intelligence to actionable intelligence. And this is going to be the cornerstone of networking for logistics in the long run. It's about what we need to know versus the actionable intelligence checklist that we have. Artificial intelligence is going to help us make a lot of decisions. We can analyze more data that we couldn't do in the past. We can analyze more data points. We can gather more information and so on. The trick for the new manager, the goal for the new executive, the new leader is going to be coming up with actionable intelligence. What's going to help us guide strategy for us? What's going to help us meet the strategies that we've established? And so the real hard questions about artificial intelligence for the long run are going to be some of the hard questions about, does the information have meaning? Is this something that really is going to be specific for what we're trying to do? What's the context of the data that we gathered? Does it really matter right now? And what decisions can we really be making with this information? Part of the challenge is that we look forward. The changes in the market are so dynamic, it has to move beyond just historical data. So we have to take a look at it from the context that it's being collected. So we have this actionable intelligence checklist, which is absolutely essential. Is the data complete? Is it relevant? How old is it in terms of speed? How many people have access to it? Is it accurate? What's the context? What was it gathered for? And does it matter for us going forward? If it's relevant today, is it relevant tomorrow? Those are the questions that we're going to have to be asking to keep going forward. So we move on to the network effect for logistics management in particular. We like to conduct audits of these types of activities. So what would an audit of your network look like today? If you think about the organization that you work for today and think about it from a logistics perspective or a supply chain perspective, and then expand that out into some kind of a network effect, the 7 questions that are critical to start any conversation, and I use these with my executive team regularly, what's being done all up and down the supply chain? When is it being done along the value chain? Which organizations are doing that? Who's doing it? And why are they doing it? Where is it being done has become more complex for many of our organizations, especially in the manufacturing arena where we have components being assembled in different regions or different countries or different markets. So where it's being done has an impact on how we manage our logistics efforts and how we keep our production cycles up to speed. How's it being done is being changed every day by automation and robotics. How well does it perform? Assessment and business impact analysis doesn't go away. It's just going to have to be more sophisticated as we move forward. Ultimately, if we're going to build networks that are effective, the final question is, why is it important for our ecosystem? So now again, we're taking a step back from our own corporate strategy or our own organization strategy and taking a look at it across the entire ecosystem. Who's this going to be good for and why? Is it something we should really take on or not? When we do that, we end up with a discussion about the innovative capability of your logistics network. And it's interesting when we get folks in the room along the way here. If you get the shipper and carriers in a room to talk about this, or if you have different shippers talk about this at a conference or an event, it's always an interesting discussion because everybody believes they're an innovative company until they start looking a couple layers into the organization, or once they get outside of the four walls, they lose track pretty quickly. So innovative capabilities moves beyond new product development, but innovation in terms of our logistics management programs. Some of the things we like to do is to work on finding connectors. And these are the connectors to critical facilitators for collaboration. Now, collaboration is something that's not a new concept. We've had this discussion for quite a while in business and certainly in logistics as well. The critical factor now is that we need to start expanding where we look for these things. Traditionally, we've gone to distribution networks and trade shows and different industry events to find connections with other folks in our industry. Now that we're looking for just one more entity, we're looking for highly specialized companies, highly specialized individuals, and so on. So the question is, if you're looking for something that's unique to come to your network or to your supply chain or your logistics management program, one of the questions I ask is, do you attend conferences or trade shows outside of your professional specialty? You know, we get so focused on what we do that you have to sometimes take a look outside of your comfort zone. Now, I was hired at UNO 7 years ago to start a brand new supply chain management program, and I came into this from a manufacturer's perspective because I came from the high tech industry. So I came from the computer industry. So I really took this manufacturing perspective to develop the program, and so we put it all together. I interviewed all the manufacturers and logistics firms, and we had a good program underway. And we put that information up on our website for the first time. And the very first phone call I came the next day was from a hospital. Oh, wow, hospital. I was not ready for that call. I was thinking about manufacturing. And I didn't think anything about it at first. And the next day, another hospital called, and wow, I'm sitting there thinking, wait, why are all these hospitals calling me? I'm the supply chain guy. As a result, hospital has some unique needs in terms of supply chain and logistics management. We know that now in the face of the pandemic, but that they buy a lot of expensive equipment. They consume a lot of stuff. They have inventory that's highly regulated and perishable, and they also have to dispose of hazardous waste sometimes. And so they had a need for materials managers, they needed purchasing managers, and so on. So when they saw supply chain management, they started calling me. So the next thing I had to do with my advisory board was to add 3 more hospitals. I have executives from 3 different hospitals on my advisory board now because came from this without thinking about anything beyond manufacturing, which is all I knew at that point in time. I'm not an expert in healthcare, but I know a lot more than I did 7 years ago. Questions for developing your network. Are you or young leaders in your organization part of leadership organizations? You know, there are lots of them around the globe, and get involved whenever you can, either for yourself or for the up and coming young leaders of your program. You know, as an example, Young Global Leaders Network is one of them I'm a little bit familiar with. It can be essential for getting that next generation of leadership in place and helping them develop. It also helps them find that one more entity down the road. If they get involved with a network like this now, when they become executives later on, they may know somebody to call when they need one more thing to make that logistics program work better. And then the last question I like to ask with my partners in particular is, how often do you meet with parties outside of your company, including consumers, government officials, university contacts, or things like that? As an example, I worked as a number of years as a consultant at the Gallup organization, working with information technology companies. And one of the things that we found that was really helpful was having a customer advisory board. Do you meet with your best customers once a year? Have you shown them your new product roadmap? Do they know where you're headed? Have you ever talked to them about what their expectations are in terms of logistics, that delivery on the final mile, and what is it you're going to have to do to meet their needs in the future? The regulatory environment globally continues to evolve, whether it's trade agreements or tariffs or new kinds of agreements around the world. These things are all going to change. Documentation and compliance, documentation in particular, is evolving as we move forward. And then finally, university contacts. Again, one of the best things that we have in our program right now is that we have over 40 industry partners. And they contact us nearly every week. At least one of them contacts me. I meet with them twice a year, one-on-one, to talk about what their needs are, and more importantly, what's changing. They've helped develop the original curriculum for us. We turn out graduates that they want. And what has been surprising is how quickly that is evolving over time. So I've added 4 new courses in the last 2 years based on input from my advisory board members. It also makes my graduates very employable. To this point now, we've had 100% placement of our graduates. They've all had jobs when they graduate. I have students that are graduating in May of 2022, so not this spring, but next spring. They've already accepted their job because the industry partners are becoming that assertive in finding that talent, because when they find somebody good, they realize they have to hire them right away. So trying to figure out who your partners are will be critical for building your networks going forward. Then finally, one of the things I wanted to touch on to start to wrap this up then is the collaborative leaders needed for network design. Collaborative leaders need to reinvent their talent in an ongoing manner. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I face when I'm coaching new executives or executives that have been in place for a while. Because in order to become an executive at an organization, what has had happen most of the time? You've been successful doing something. You either launched a new product, you brought quality up, you brought costs down, you improved customer service, but you did something. And if you did something to be successful, what do you want to do to continue that success? Well, we're most comfortable keep doing the same thing over and over. Trying something different feels risky, but the change that is on the horizon is forcing our leaders now to think about how they're going to have to not only re-engineer their workforce, but how to reinvent their own skill set. How do they reinvent their own strategies or talent to be or remain collaborative leaders of the future? The things that we're running into now that are also a challenge for leaders of today is the differences in convictions and cultural values and operating norms of a global market. It adds complexity to our collaboration across the board. International supply chains are much more complex than the domestic ones. And yet we have more and more international supply chains developing across the globe, and we need to really take advantage of these opportunities, but we can't do that unless we get all these other issues straightened out. The last thing I coach my advisors on is preparation for opportunities beyond COVID-19, and that is the theme of most of our discussions today. We talk about what it is that they're doing today, what they could be doing tomorrow. We've all been through the process of how do you deal with the pandemic in the early going? How do you do recruiting? How do you onboard employees? How do you have work at home employees? What is it that we can do to make that work or not work into the future? But it's time now, again, to look up at the horizon and say, what's beyond COVID-19? We certainly have to get through the pandemic. We still have to be successful, and we have to get there. We also have to start preparing for what's next, and what comes after the pandemic. Those are the leaders that are going to be successful in the next wave of commerce from a global perspective, and they'll understand the need for networking to improve their logistics management programs. Those are the kinds of leaders that are going to have an exciting future, and I really look forward to working with them because they're going to have great new ideas on how we develop the technology that's coming down our direction. We're developing new workforce habits and training and skills that's going to be ongoing, not just an event. So re-engineering is going to be a process, more of a process than an event. So it's the preparation for opportunities beyond COVID-19 that helps me get through what's going on day to day right now. It also helps my industry partners talk about positive decisions and what does it do for their strategy in the future. What does your strategy look for when we get past COVID-19? With that, and that's all I have for today. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Thanks for your patience to go through that. I know that's a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steve, for sharing your valuable perspective on the subject. So now we will give 10 minutes for Q&As. So as I told before, we ask our assistants to raise your hand through the platform or open your microphone or write your question in the chat. So, Monica, if you want, you can open your microphone.
Hi, good afternoon. My question mostly relates to, would you say that all of your advices can also be used, or they apply to people not exactly young or just beginning their careers, but someone looking to change their career?
That is a great question. And the short answer is absolutely yes. We have seen a great influx of mid-career or early career candidates coming into our MBA program and into our training programs for executives. I'm kicking off a new leadership program next week dealing with this very issue. And it's not for just the new, it's not just for the new employees. It's also for folks that are at early stages of their career, mid-career. I even have executives that are already in place. I had students in my classroom last semester that were 65 years old. It's not often, as I'm an old guy, okay, and it's not often I get students that are still older than I am, but they're recognizing that they have to reinvent themselves. And that's really a critical part of the process. So this fits all the way along the career. Great question.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? You can open your microphone or write your question in the chat as you wish. Okay, I think it was very clear for everyone.
Okay, that's fine, no problem.
So, well, if anyone has another question, as I said before, by this webinar, we officially launched the Professional Networking and Communication course, a great international experience we invite you to attend in order to develop your skills even more and become your professional networking into business global opportunities. So we invite our participants to stay a few more minutes to share with you more details about this attractive international program. But before that, on behalf of Universidad Anáhuac, we want to thank you so much, Professor Steve Schulz, for sharing with us a little more in this interesting subject. It was a pleasure to listen to your presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be part of this tonight, so thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon. Y bueno, ahora quisiera compartirles algunos detalles de el curso que vamos a tener, que vamos a iniciar en el mes de mayo. Y bueno, para eso le cedo la palabra a la maestra Marisol para que pues, bueno, nos dé algunos detalles y algunas ventajas de este increíble programa que esperemos pues decidan tomar con nosotros.
Muchas gracias, Bego. Pues antes que nada ya switchamos al español. La verdad es que muchas gracias. El tema a mí me pareció muy interesante. Antes que nada, agradecerles a todos su presencia. Y bueno, en efecto, nosotros quisimos trabajar este curso con la Universidad de Nebraska porque vimos que había realmente un segmento de la población que se estaba dedicando pues a realizar todo este tipo de negociaciones y que hace a veces un poco de falta el saber el cómo, ¿no? A lo mejor uno lo va aprendiendo sobre la práctica, pero no hay como que tú tengas la oportunidad real de vivir como tal con empresarios que están en Estados Unidos, con gente que está haciendo los negocios en Estados Unidos y que ellos te estén diciendo a ti, mira, yo le hice de esta manera, yo le hice de esta otra, no hagas esto, haz aquello, o sea, que te lleven sobre una práctica tal cual, ¿no? Y bueno, este curso precisamente lo pensamos diseñándolo para que fuera avalado tanto por la Universidad de Anáhuac, pero creo que muy importante que está avalado por una universidad en Estados Unidos, en este caso la Universidad de Nebraska en Omaha, ¿no? También lo pensamos y diseñamos con base en los tiempos, porque sabemos que, bueno, las personas están a veces pues ocupadas, precisamente están haciendo negocio o bien están entrando en este ámbito y por eso es que se decidió que fuera 8 semanas y que fuera muy enfocado en la construcción de redes profesionales. Todas estas pues encaminadas a generar este tipo de oportunidades que les comentamos, ¿no? Unas de las bondades, ustedes ya las pueden ver aquí en la pantalla, muchas gracias, Bego, pues un número uno que es un programa de alto nivel internacional. La Universidad de Omaha se distingue, de Nebraska, perdón, en Omaha se distingue precisamente por este tipo de programas de networking, de leadership, y que ellos lo avalen, realmente dan un gran background en el currículum, ¿no? Es un programa que está avalado, yo les decía, pues por 2 universidades, tiene un doble aval, tanto por la Universidad de Anáhuac como por la Universidad de Nebraska. Realmente al estar avalado, bueno, los está avalando también lo que es una acreditación de la AACSB que justo avala al Colegio de Negocios en Omaha como tal. Ya les había comentado que tenía profesores americanos durante todo el programa. Esto no quiere decir que, híjole, yo tengo que saberme todo el inglés y no le voy a entender. No, 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 porque ellos están en este entendido. O sea, es importante para nosotros que sí se dé en inglés, porque al darse en inglés tú ya estás quitándote un poco esa barrera que a veces nos ponemos, ¿no? Y que decimos, ay, a lo mejor me cuesta un poco de trabajo, pero de eso se trata, que en 8 semanas uno se quite ese tipo de barreras que podemos llegar a tener, que le perdamos justo a dar el paso, a salir de nuestra zona de confort, que perdamos eso de estar así como tan confortables y que nos aventemos a hacer este tipo de negociaciones. Para eso están ellos, precisamente para eso es este curso. Ellos están para enseñarnos justo sobre la marcha, ¿no? Y en inglés, para que nosotros aprendamos también qué es lo que se debe de hacer, porque ellos nos van a dar una guía como tal, ¿no? Sí va a haber, por supuesto, empresarios y líderes de corporativos americanos, que eso es muy importante. ¿Por qué? Porque no en todos los cursos se pueden llegar a tener y en este sí. Y precisamente lo que yo les decía, o sea, ¿qué les van a dar? Habilidades de liderazgo, estilos de liderazgo que muchas veces no tenemos la oportunidad de aprenderlo. Aquí en México lo podemos platicar entre mexicanos, lo podemos platicar con personas que a lo mejor han ido, pero no hay como quien lo esté haciendo en ese momento y te diga, no, o sea, no debes de hacer esto, sí debes de hacer aquello. Primero presentas a tal, luego presentas a tal. A lo mejor aquí en México lo hacemos de una manera diferente, ¿no? Tal cual. Y pues les comentaba que en efecto es un horario pues 100% ejecutivo, es virtual y pues es de corta duración. Para que se llegue a tener realmente la productividad dentro del curso, ¿no? Realmente sí queremos aprovechar esta vinculación que tenemos con la Universidad de Nebraska en Omaha y que están abiertos pues mucho ellos a tener toda esta vinculación, todo este ejercicio de intercambio académico, porque ellos saben que esto se hace en principio por un intercambio académico y que va en cuanto al desarrollo de estas experiencias y de estos expertise en liderazgo. Y el que ellos nos quieran hacer parte de, yo creo que en cuanto a la experiencia, les puedo contar de que uno hace negocios realmente con la gente con la que de repente está estudiando, con la que de repente llega a ser un trabajo, un pequeño convivio académico, ¿no? De intercambio de conocimientos y que de aquí salen estas redes precisamente. Entonces, la verdad es que es un programa muy noble, es un programa muy sencillo. es un programa que está enfocado en esa realización de adquirir estas habilidades, ¿no? Y por eso queríamos presentarlo como tal para ustedes. Muchas gracias, Bego.
Gracias, maestra. Y pues bueno, ahora les voy a comentar, pues bueno, las características generales de este diplomado, bueno, de este curso, que bueno, vamos a tener, va a iniciar el 7 de mayo de este año, termina el 25 de junio, o sea, son 2 meses, tiene una duración de 60 horas. El cierre de la convocatoria es el 8 de abril, entonces, pues bueno, para que de aquí al 8 de abril, pues lo consideren para inscribirse. Los horarios, como comentaba la maestra Marisol, es un horario ejecutivo, son los viernes de 6 de la tarde a 10 de la noche y los sábados de 9 de la mañana a 1 de la tarde. 100% virtual, nosotros les vamos a estar dando los accesos a las salas para que puedan asistir a las sesiones. Esto va a ser totalmente en tiempo real, pues bueno, para crear una verdadera interacción, tanto con los profesores como incluso con los mismos alumnos. Ahora, aunque el curso va a ser impartido 100% en inglés, no se necesita alguna certificación, simplemente, pues bueno, sí se les pide que tengan un nivel intermedio o avanzado si es que lo tienen, pero si es intermedio, sin ningún problema pueden participar, porque finalmente lo que se les va a dar en este diplomado, pues bueno, son las técnicas, ¿no? Para hacer esta negociación, entonces incluso hay cosas que teniendo un nivel intermedio o avanzado no sabemos y la idea es adquirirlo en este curso. Ahora, en cuanto a los costos, pues bueno, al público en general tienen una inscripción de 4,000 pesos y de ahí tienen 2 colegiaturas de 6,100 cada una. Ahora, a la comunidad anáhuac o si tenemos algún convenio o incluso si se llegan a inscribir en pareja, pues bueno, les damos una tarifa preferencial. Esta es una inscripción de 4,000 pesos, eso se mantiene, y las colegiaturas serían de 5,290 cada una. Entonces, es una gran oportunidad. El día de mañana vamos a tener una sesión informativa. Con mucho gusto en unos momentos les voy a hacer llegar la invitación a esta sesión informativa. Pues bueno, vamos a ahondar un poquito más en los detalles, sobre todo académicos del programa. Nos va a acompañar uno de los profesores del curso, que es Houston Pollen. Él es de Nebraska, es un experto en emprendimiento, es experto en networking, entonces es una gran oportunidad. Espero que de verdad mañana pues tengan el chance de acompañarnos. Va a ser igual a las 6 de la tarde a través de Zoom, les voy a mandar la invitación. Y bueno, para quienes estén interesados, justo Houston Pollen la próxima semana nos va a dar también un webinar el 25 de marzo. Igual me imagino que algunos ya están registrados y los que no, pues para que se registren. Igual les voy a hacer llegar la invitación porque pues nos va a dar mucho gusto contar con su presencia. Y pues bueno, si alguien tiene alguna duda, me puede preguntar ahorita, si no lo puede pensar y mañana en la sesión informativa, pues con mucho gusto les aclaramos las dudas que tengan. Les dejamos ahí los contactos, están mis datos, que soy Begoña de Aldecoa, mi correo, mi teléfono, y también están los de la licenciada Andere Trueba, su correo y su teléfono. Por cualquier duda o cualquier inquietud, pues con mucho gusto los atendemos. Muchas gracias a ustedes por su tiempo y su participación. Espero nos veamos mañana para la sesión informativa. Que tengan todos muy buena noche.
Gracias, igualmente.